this episode, we have Paul Cohen, I Spy, private investigator to the stars. This is Susan Stafford with Out of the Box, and I'm here with a friend and an unbelievable private eye, I Spy in Los Angeles, Paul Cohen. And of course, we're Zooming each other because those are the rules. This man has done so much investigation on so many different people, but someone particular that we all love. That's Casey Kasem. Casey, we all loved. Remember his top 40 music? His top 40 music, right, Paul, was the number one American.
He had a magic voice.
Yes, he did. And he had a
he-
magic heart, too. Kind man.
I know. I met Casey through you actually, and I had several lunches over the years with him. We discussed because we had a liking for old Mercedes, and we would joke about that because we would see each other the following year, and we would joke about the fact that we still had the same cars, and that everybody, our wives and our friends, were all saying, "Why don't you get a new car? Get a new car." But we liked our old cars, so we're happy.
You know, when he discovered himself to be the top 40, Casey Kasem, man, the tribute to the radio broadcaster that caused it and invented it was Gordon McClendon. And Gordon McClendon, I was married to. So that's how I met Casey. And again, Casey was quite a remarkable human being. And when Gordon McClendon developed the top 40 format, it left a mark. Come on, it left a mark on all of us. I mean, we loved top 40. What can I say? I mean, it was everything. Now, he was married to Jean, who I met before she was pregnant. And for 34 years, I believe.
Yeah, over 30 years. I remember that.
Yeah, and then I met his first wife, just a real peach, Linda, and their children. And just a real fine family, you know.
Yeah, he had one child with the second marriage with Jean, and I think her name was Liberty.
Liberty, yes, and she had a hard time delivering her, and sure enough, the baby came, and the baby has been, I don't know how old she is now, do you know? I have no idea.
Yeah.
I have no idea. I could have looked it up for our conversation today, but I didn't. And when Jean called to ask me for advice, I told her about the only thing I could do to help her, not knowing what she was doing and what was involved, not knowing how sick Casey was, not knowing anything. I did what I do. I either send you to a rabbi, a preacher, or Paul Cohen. That's pretty much what I do.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I sent her to you. And now there's a lot you can't talk about, but there's a lot you can talk about.
Right.
So,
she came to me with some issues. And just to clarify, Casey had at end stage Parkinson's. He had I forget the name, it's another disorder, which made his speaking and his movements very limited.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, and there was a dispute going on. Casey had a very large estate, and it was literally, I'm not joking, all over the world. And there was some issues on what was the best way to take care of him, his physical needs. And there was a difference of opinion. And this resulted in a lot of very hard feelings between Jean and the three kids from the prior marriage. Mm-hmm. And that's what prompted everything that was going on. It reached a point where the Santa Monica, I think, DA was involved. And there were some questions, and there was a welfare check. And it had to be resolved because they couldn't get an idea of what was going on, whether there was elder abuse involved. And so Jean called me up for some ideas of how to approach it.
I guess the first question is, I mean, the other day I had Glenn Campbell's son on, and they wouldn't let him go in and see his father, but twice a month under supervision. And I think Carrie Kasem has passed a law on this. Not for sure. You're allowed to see your folks or your loved one when they're passing. See, the problem is that he had 3 children with Linda, 1 child with
Gene,
and 30 odd years of marriage, but he was always dedicated to his family, whether it was his family with Linda or his family with Gene. So he probably found himself very split until he got sick. And then it went a fiasco. There was a fiasco. Isn't it a fiasco what happened to him?
it's sad, but from my years of experience in dealing with litigation, because that's primarily all I do is litigated cases, when there's an estate involved, the worst in the beneficiaries come out. It's just the nature of the beast. And it brings out the worst in people. But when there is no estate, and it's a question of who's going to be saddled with the bills of the funeral expenses, which are enormous now, it also becomes an issue. But when there is an estate, and the control over the estate is dependent upon the control over the individual, then the worst in people come out. And that's what happened here.
It's hard enough when your father and mother are sick. Just we'll say father, when your father's sick, because that's my father. That may be her father, but it's my father too. So there's a territorial issue that's going on here. Long before we get to the money, long before we get to ownership, long before it's territory, that's my father.
You're absolutely correct about it, because there is and I don't know why, but it's just human nature that if me or my sister, for instance, have a loved one that needs taken care of, we have difference of opinion on how it should be done, and what his immediate needs are. Whether they're mental needs or physical needs, there's a difference of opinion there. And that tends to raise other issues in the relationship and bring them to a head.
Well, the main thing is men and women don't think the same.
Agreed.
And therefore, I may think more with my heart than my head, or vice versa.
Exactly. I mean, one of the things that I have with my wife, Sherry, is that she thinks with her heart, not her head. I think with my head, not my heart. And we managed to make it through 50 years of marriage. But we have difference of opinion just last year when my own mother-in-law passed.
Yes, and I'm sorry about that. I'm sorry, Paul.
Thank you. But we had differences of opinion. And it's only because of years of loving each other that we understood each other enough to know that we were not maliciously saying so.
Yeah, the thing here is, here we are talking. I mean, we will talk about Casey Kasem, but this is all part of it. Death is not handled well by the American people.
No.
Death should be, the pain is over. And for me, as a believer, I will see that person again.
I hope you're right.
But meanwhile, I have to put that person someplace, whether it's cremation or in a grave, and do what's best for them, because they're not in pain. We're in pain. They're not in pain.
No.
And so what'd you end up doing with your mother-in-law?
I'm sorry?
What did you end up doing with your mother-in-law?
Well, we had made arrangements. My father-in-law passed away in 96. And so they were married almost 50 years too. And we knew that they wanted to be married together. So what we did is when my father-in-law passed, we bought a gravesite with my father-in-law. And so it was all set up. But there were still corresponding costs that were involved with the internment. But we knew what she wanted, and we knew that we needed to do that. And that's what we also wanted, because we wanted them to be together. So there was no dispute there. But when you have a blended family, as we had in this case with Kasems, those conditions are not prevalent. The first family has one way of looking at it, second family has another way, and that's normal.
It's normal, but it's territory.
It's territorial, yes.
He's my husband now. He's not your husband. I'm pointing that out because that's what people do. And instead of saying, what's best for Casey? Where should we put Casey? Then it becomes, and I understand there was a lot of fight about money because there was so much money. And I don't know if I read correctly, but I understand that it started with his being sick and then, of course, his passing, but it came down to he was 82 years old, and it says he had complications from dementia.
Parkinson's, yeah.
I really believe in my heart that there had been a nicer way to have buried him with everybody there.
That was one of the issues. There was also an issue of the belief of whether life is so ultimately important that the existence of life is more important than the quality of life. And you can understand that better than I because of your background. And when that happens, there's a difference of opinion. To keep me alive on a ventilator with no control over bodily functions, no way of communicating, and staring into the ceiling is not my idea of living. It's not my idea of what I want to share with my family. But
then again, I'm going to interrupt.
Yeah.
You're not scared to die.
Well, I'm looking at it as an adventure.
Yeah. See, therein lies the difference. As an adventure. Did you hear that, folks? That's how he's looking at it. So it's not like most American people. Oh, I've got to die. He's dying. Oh my. See the difference? What a difference. The difference of looking forward to what's more than here, because we know there's more in here. Wow, where am I going now?
The best scenario, I get to see my mom and dad, my loved ones, my family, my rest of my family will catch up to me. The worst scenario is I get some peace and quiet.
Yeah, that's the worst.
Yeah.
You'll get more than that. But yeah. I felt like, because there's so many things that you know that you can't say, and I respect that, but what in the world was the problem? What was the problem? Is it so deep we can't talk about it, or can you give us a tip? What was the problem?
To me, and I worked for Gene for a number of months, the problem as I saw it, and I'm not talking about the technical aspects of the case or the factual aspects of the case. I'm just talking about what my observations were, where there was a very distinct and understandable difference of opinion on how he should be handled and whether they should let him go in peace or keep him alive as long as possible. And then also who had control over him and who could make that decisions. And that turned into be the issue between the litigants as opposed to what was really going on. Because Casey didn't care one way or the other. He wasn't even there. He had already moved on.
So would it be safe to say then that Casey's demise could have been easier, softer, and sweeter?
Again, that would be a matter of opinion, depending on whose side you're on.
I'm not on anybody's side.
Yeah.
I just like to see Casey be comfortable.
Well, I'm sure he is comfortable. He was given
Now.
care. Yeah, now he is, but he was given care, whether he was in the custody and control of Gene or in the Carrie and the other kids. They were
Mhm.
both have their own um, version of what was proper. So you can't fault either side for doing that. Um, but the person that has to suffer would be Casey.
Mhm.
But he never was without medical care. The question is what kind of medical care should have been given, whether it was best to, if he was in the process, the final throes of dying, whether you continue to feed him or you just let him go and not feed
Mhm.
him and just make him comfortable. Those were some of the issues that were involved.
And
And
were
then,
they,
yeah, go ahead.
excuse me, I was just going to ask, were the other children allowed to see him?
With some restrictive, yes, but very restrictive. Um, the Gene thought that Casey would get better care up north, moved him up north. There was a legal battle down here over the conservatorship, and I believe Carrie was appointed conservator, and they were in the process of finalizing that. And I think it was if I remember correctly, something in June of 14, if
Hmm.
my memory corrects me. Um, they were trying to decide what was going on, and they ultimately had the doctors up there give a medical opinion of what was happening. And they came to a conclusion of X, Y, and Z. And then literally almost immediately after that decision was made, Casey saved a lot of problems because he passed by himself.
Hmm. Hmm.
So he did not have to suffer beyond that. And he had drugs. He was not in pain. He just could not communicate. And I don't even know if he had brain function. I mean, he had bronchi with breathing and such, but there's a difference between living and live alive.
Yeah, I think because Talk had it that she'd gotten a limousine and drove him in a Hertz or something to another location, and we didn't know where he was going to be buried. And I think, in a way, whether I knew Casey, which I did, and his kindness, and work on peace in Israel is what we worked on with Dan Enright. I think, in a way, I felt, what are they doing to my Casey? Because each of us from the top 40s, America top 40s, when he became the all, I mean, he was the voice. Um, I mean,
And that's exactly what I was talking about, because you have your version of what's right for
yeah,
Casey. Jean had her version of what's right for Casey, and Carrie had her version of what's right for Casey.
it
And
just,
only God knows what was right for Casey.
well, only God does. That's true. Do we know where he's buried?
I believe he's buried in Norway.
Where?
In Norway,
In Norway.
yeah.
And
And
do you
I don't
know?
have an explanation. He passed away, I believe it was in Washington. Uh, there was an autopsy performed. And then, for whatever reason, it was determined by whoever had control over the remains, he was buried in Norway. And I believe the funeral was uh, publicized, videotaped. So it's not an issue of where he is.
No, I recall it was Sweden or Norway or somewhere,
Yeah,
that direction, and that he and his daughter Liberty uh, were at the
correct,
place. That's
correct.
as much information that I know. Um, it must be very difficult. It's hard enough when you have to let someone go, and then you have to share them with everyone because
And
Casey,
share all parts of him with everyone, because
Yeah,
Casey was a complicated individual. I didn't know him that well. You knew him far better than I did. But he had different aspects of him. We would talk about, as I said, our common love for Mercedes, old Mercedes. And yet then he would talk in the same breath about what's right for this individual or rights with that nationality or how things could be made better. And he had the blessing, for lack of a better way of putting it, of being able to make some of those inroads. He could make some of those inroads because he had the funds to do it, and he did. And that's why he joined so many organizations and promoted the well-being of the national brotherhood.
Yeah,
He didn't look at people as Christians or Jews or Muslims. He looked at people as people.
well, that's why when we worked on Mideast communication there at Santa Monica, it was for one reason, that was for peace. That's it, peace.
Yeah.
We did that for a few years and got to know him, and wow, what a wonderful man. What a wonderful man. And to see how he fell into this, I mean, McClendon in this top 40 and what he did with it.
And he didn't throw it up at you either. He wore it as a badge, but he didn't throw it up in your face. He was proud of it. He enjoyed the pleasure that he gave out to people, but he didn't make you wallow in it either. So you felt very comfortable. When I sat down to have lunch with him, I had a couple lunches independently of the meetings that we had, and we would just talk about nothing and enjoy it. And it was just like talking to one of my old high school buddies.
Yeah, well, he had that gift, and fortunately, there are not enough people with that gift. But he's from Lebanon, I believe.
Yes, I believe so.
And I've never found a Lebanese that didn't have more gratitude or graciousness in them than a Lebanese.
Yeah.
Really.
But he never threw up the difference. He just looked at us as human, not as from Lebanon or Israel. My relatives come back from Germany and Israel. You know, I have ties to both of them, and some of the founders of Israel. In fact, Chaim Weizmann was a relative of mine.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and so I understand the makings of Israel, how it came about, some of the unknown things about Israel and how it was formed, and how a lot of people in Lebanon and in Iraq and in Egypt were in favor of Israel. And there were a lot of people that weren't in favor of Israel, but they were more vocal than the ones that were.
I'm sorry to hear the latter part of that, because we all, excuse me, please. Excuse me. Thank you. I think we all, okay, maybe not we all, me, stand for Israel, and I stand for Israel, and I stand for Israel. And I think that those that don't are missing a lot.
It's sad, but it's true. Mm-hmm. It's true.
We have a few minutes left, and I don't know if there's anything that you'd like to share about Casey or just about yourself. I'm so proud of what you do in your work. You are the hound dog of all hound dogs, I must say.
Well, I enjoy what I'm doing, and that's kept me going. And I've had the downers, the down cases. And again, I think I've discussed this with you before. When children are involved, there are no winners. There are only losers. And it's a question of whether the children can move forward and have a productive life or a happy life. And going along the same lines, Casey Kasem's case is only indicative of a larger problem of people that can't sit down and resolve things without having to go to court to do so. And no matter if you got all the money in the world and you hire the best lawyers, ultimately you're still going to have to sit down at a table with the other party and work things out. So why can't you save all of the trauma, the aggravation, the drama by avoiding the attorneys and just sit down and talk like you and I are talking right now? And communication, I think, is the most important part of that. And I'm afraid it doesn't exist in a lot of cases.
Communication's everything. And speaking of which, when you come back on the show, we're going to be doing missing children.
Missing children, yeah.
Trafficking. Do you want to talk about trafficking?
Child trafficking, you mean? Yeah. I've had several cases where the issue of trafficking, abduction, comes into play because, again, and unfortunately, it comes in play for the wrong reasons. The reason generally is you have a petitioner and you've got a respondent. One of them has custody of the child, one of them doesn't. They feel that they don't get the proper representation by the court, or the ruling does not go in their favor, and they disappear with the children. The individual who does not have custody of the child now has no way of finding that child unless they raise the case to a whole new level. So they bring in these allegations of child trafficking, child sexual abuse, and then all these people get involved. They ultimately find the child, and then the psychologists and everything else, once they get custody of the child, have to deal with what's going on. The children are not stupid. They're like sponges. They absorb everything. They hear that. They don't know what's wrong. I did the Mcmahon preschool case. I was the chief investigator for the defense on that. I saw what it did to the children. And why? That's a case that involved an individual who was going to be fired from a news program, a DA that was worried about being reelected for next term, a woman that was running a child protective services type of organization that didn't have any clients, and a woman that was literally crazy and was willing to sacrifice her child and did. And then all these people, and I'm not saying that they did not do wrong. I'm saying what they did wrong was not handle it right.
Right. And then that's one of the things we're going to talk about.
Right.
We have a list of things we're going to talk about. One thing I'm going to close with, even though we're supposed to be talking about Casey, you and I start talking about everything, is do you work much with elderly abuse?
Yes, a lot. I get a lot of claims in like that.
So should we do a show on that?
Yeah, I think it would be more important rather than focus on a specific individual, because I can give you, Kasem was just one individual. I can give you a whole file cabinet full of people that, one, they're trying to look for their loved ones. Two, they're trying to figure out what happened to them and if they're cared for and what will be the outcome. And some people don't care that there's anything in the pot left for them, and other people do. So you got to take all of that into consideration. But the person that suffers is the individual that needs to be cared for.
Well, the person that suffers also is, you're like a first responder. You see, you have to take this home. You have to shut that office, take all those people out of your head, and go to a dining room and act like there's nothing wrong. Well,
one of the things I found out, and it's been a big help since they were born, but my grandchildren, when I start getting down a little bit and I want to just relax and be myself, I'll go find one of my grandkids, pump them full of sugar, and then play with them.
Bad. Very bad, bad.
But I've never won an argument with any of my grandchildren. I got 4 of them. A year-old today.
Mazel tov.
Thank you. He's 3-year-old, a 7-year-old, and an 11-year-old, 9-year-old. All right. And I've never won an argument with any of them, and I don't care.
Yeah, well.
But it's just fun. I can just play with them and be a kid. And that's how I retreat. And I don't look at the negativity of my job. I don't carry it with me because I can empathize with you. I can try to help you, but I'm not going to carry the guilt of it.
No, but there was a day that you didn't know how to do that, I bet.
There was a day I had to come to a reckoning that it would kill me if I didn't figure a way out.
Right.
And I had my medical issues, and they're related to stress and everything. But I'm 71 and I'm still here.
This is Susan Stafford, Out of the Box with Paul Cohen. And we're talking about, we started talking about Casey Kasem. What a great guy, top 40 music artist who we all remember. And Paul handled the private investigation on it. And so what he could talk about, we did talk about. And then we ended up talking about what we're going to talk about, because we'll be doing a show each week with Paul. And next week, I think we're going to talk about, what do you think, missing children or abused children?
Well, they're the same, because a missing child is an abused child.
True.
And it's a question of the system itself is what should be looked at and evaluated. The children are are sort of clogs or wheels inside of this, and the system needs to be improved. Much like the laws, not to go to a different subject, but the laws of what to do with the remains of individuals, and what needs to be done, and why can't you get prosecutions of certain cases?
We have 15 minutes here. Let's talk about that.
Okay.
Because we're here, let's talk about it. We'll make it part of the show.
Okay. Well, what I'd like to focus on, if we have a little bit of time, is that it's very frustrating on my part. And I get involved to put cases together or take them apart. Generally, they put them together. And there are times when I can put together a case, and to the degree where I'm certain that if it goes in front of a jury, a grand jury, or a judge, it'll get a conviction. But I am a private investigator. I don't have a badge. I've worked with both federal and state agencies, Secret Service, FBI, ICE, etc. But there are times when I presented cases that would have absolute probabilities, not certainties, but probabilities of convictions. And I get turned away because the case is not severe enough, or it's going to cost too much to prosecute. And the criminals or the defendants in these matters have a pretty good perception of how much a case is going to cost the government to pursue it. And with that said, they know that if the government has to spend $750,000, $1 million to prosecute and only get a Class A felony out of it, and a sentence of 1 to 3 years in a federal penitentiary, which you have to do only 85% of your time, or if it's a state court, the same sentence, but you only have to produce a third or a quarter of your time, it's just not worth it to them, and they'll pass. So they'll say, thank you for presenting a case, and they'll turn me away.
So are you saying to me it's all about money?
Yes.
Has it always been that way?
It is, but this is hard, concrete facts. This is justice. And again, justice is for those that can afford it.
Justice is for those that can afford it.
Yes.
Huh. So how do you pick your cases then?
Good question. I have to look at it from this perspective. He had a serious illness. His time was very limited. He cared about providing for his family. But, and not to speak disrespectful of him, but he didn't do a very good job of it. He allowed himself to be manipulated. And because of that, there were conflicting documents, and those documents had to be resolved. And that made it difficult. And that's why his death became so prominent, because of the amount of money that was involved, the theatrics that went on, which are well documented. With Jean, I think one thing, not speaking against her, but she had a confrontation with Carrie outside of the house one time, and throwing biblical phrases back and forth. And that's not what it's about. It was about Casey, not about that. And it got distorted, and that's what bothers me. The fact that it got distorted from what it should be. And there's no way to resolve it, especially when the motivations were directed at each of the litigants as opposed to being directed for the benefit of Casey.
Mhm.
Casey was being taken care of. The standard of the care that he was receiving was sufficient for the governmental officers that were reviewing it. But again, I can talk to 5 officers and get 5 different descriptions of what I saw. So again, you have to go out and find the right officer, find the right investigator that'll tell you what you want to hear. And it's like going to shopping on a medical claim. You can give me a broken shoulder, and I can find you a doctor that'll tell you why that shoulder was broken and who's responsible for it, even if they had nothing to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because of money.
Mm-hmm.
They can bill the insurance company for it or whatever. And I'm not speaking of all doctors. I'm just saying a few bad nuts, a few bad bolts make it the barrel bad. And that's what happens all the time. And money is, unfortunately, the root of all evil.
The truth is that money is the root of all evil, but the factual issue is that you have gone on in spite of that to pick and choose and represent certain people, in spite of the fact that you have to look to see who's being, if that's corrupt, you stay out of it. You back out of it. You don't touch it. You go on.
I've had the luxury, I've really had the luxury during my career of not having to seek out cases.
Mm-hmm.
Cases have found me. And then I have the ability to say yes or no to those cases.
And
so,
you have made a difference, because when you can say no, you make a difference. That means you're not following what everybody else does. You see what I'm saying?
I take cases that I have interest in. That's why I took, I took Casey's case because I knew him and he came recommended by you.
Right.
Or Gene came recommended by you. I took the Hudson case because I was brought in because I was an expert in what was going on in elder abuse at that time because of the Mcmahon case. And although that was child abuse, there are a lot of similarities between elder and child abuse. The same things happen, just one happens to be adult, one happens to be a child.
How did that end up? Because I was in Santa Monica. I knew you were on the case. Dr. Emil Serrani was doing the psychology for it. And how that closed and she went where? What happened?
On which one? The Mcmahon case?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Yeah, the Mcmahon case was one of the most expensive trials in the history of Los Angeles. Okay. As I said before, there was a lot of collateral influences and reasons why it was presented. Ultimately, all parties were found not guilty. They still had to bear the hostility and the brunt of what happened, even though they were found by a court of law to be innocents. Ray Buckey was found innocent after the longest pretrial hearing in the history of Los Angeles. He ultimately, and I haven't confirmed this, but I've heard that he changed his name, moved up north, and is now a practicing attorney. But I just remember looking at this case and looking at what happened and the validity of what was being said and the outrageous claims that were being made. Children being flown to different cities, killings and murders of animals taking place in a dungeon that was beneath the school. This vast display of pornography supposedly at Ray Buckey's house, which turned out to be a Playboy magazine. And it boiled down to, once the press got caught into this suction, they couldn't get it out, and it was a story that was riveting to the public. And when you fuel that with individuals trying to be reelected, people trying to make a name for themselves so their school is better, a newscaster who's trying to not get fired because he hasn't brought any good stories in. It's a perfect storm. And when it all comes together, it ends up in this. And then I get hired because, in essence, I'm just a legal janitor. That's all I am. I clean up the messes that are left by people.
So,
I've always thought of myself as a legal janitor.
yeah, if that's what you want to call yourself, I'll put a star on your hat.
I'm not ashamed of calling myself that.
No, because most of the time that's what you're doing. You're cleaning up all the lies and all the whatevers, and
Correct.
trying to set the straight, the truth of the matter. But I think the school was closed.
The school is ultimately closed. It went bankrupt.
Right.
The attorneys are the only people that ever made anything out of it.
As usual.
Yeah. They all died with the stigma of this on their back, the people that have passed on. And they've tried to rebuild their lives the best they can. But there was no validity to the charges. And yet, look what it cost LA, look what it cost the taxpayers, look what it did to the families, and the children especially. Because even to this day, some of those children believe that they were abused, that they were taken down in dungeons beneath the school to watch the torture and killing of animals.
Well, I wasn't there, but I do know that if a child thinks it, then their fact it is, because what you think is what it is. Whether it
and I'm not going to change their mind. I'm not going to try to change their mind.
No. Something to have to work with, and maybe the Lord will send people that really care to work with them, because it's something in your mind forever. And forever is a long time. What's in my mind right now is I can't wait to do another interview with you. I thank you for today's time talking to me and sharing with all of us about your beliefs and what you're doing. And it's just the beginning, because we're going to do once a week with you and just listen and learn. Because when you've done so much with your life, Paul, and you've made such a difference, it's only fair that you should let us in and let us hear. So as I continue.
I appreciate what you're saying, but it's more of, I'm looking at it as more a way of sharing my experiences so that people can avoid the same situations. And they can look at what's going on with a little bit of humor and say, here's a claim that obviously could not have happened. The parties could not have done it. Here's dead people talking and testifying. Here's stories about how to get around the law when you need to get their attention. Ways of manipulating the law to your advantage, both as a negative and as a positive.
Right.
I remember once when I was just out of law school, and it's just, I don't know why it came to my mind, there was a issue of how to serve a subpoena. And when you're in law school, you'll take any job. So I was a process server. And one of the things was that you couldn't serve an individual unless they were in California. So I had to serve somebody, and they were flying from, I think it was Phoenix, Arizona to Honolulu. And I looked up the law and did shepherdizing, and I found out that the airspace above California is California.
That's right.
So, yeah, so I waited and got on the plane in Arizona, waited till I was over California, verified where the latitude and longitude was, and I served them.
I love it.
And it was a valid service.
See, those are the things you're going to be hearing more about. By the way, he's got lots of those stories.
Oh, yeah, I got serving people with a helicopter.
I mean, it's fun. It's fun. Yeah. It's really fun. So here we are, out of the box with Dr. Susan Stafford with Private Eye, I Spy, Los Angeles, Paul Cohen. Paul, we're going to see you next week, and we thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye. Shalom.
See ya.